Right, morning. As Bob has said a number of times, there's a lot of material. I'm just thinking Genesis in 6 45-minute Sundays. Yeah. We can do it. Actually, we're not too far behind. So, jumping right in, we started talking about covenants last week, and so I want to unearth that a little bit more before we do a bit of an introduction on Abraham. And the one thing that I pointed out as far as covenants was that the covenant that God makes with Noah and the covenant that God's going to make with Abraham here are one-sided. Okay? He knows we're humans. He knows that we, as human beings, are going to break our promises, our oaths, our covenants. And but still, even in spite of that, He blesses us with His end of the covenant. And so, as we think about covenants, do you remember a time when someone broke a promise or went back on their word? I'm sure all of us have something like that. Don't necessarily want anybody to share about that, but you know, and how we felt when that happened, or reverse that question, how many of us have broken an oath, broke a promise, whatever, right? And sometimes it can even be unintentional. You know, oh, I'll make sure I'm there at 4 o'clock to pick you up, and who knows, flat tire or something, right? So I think it's very interesting, and I'll just say somewhat timely, to look at Matthew 5 as we start digging into oaths and covenants. And so this is from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus just spent some teaching about, you know, this is murder. Well, let me tell you that being angry is murder, or using slurs against people's murder, you know. And then he says, and then adultery. You know, you've heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. Well, even if you look in the wrong way. And so this is what comes right after that. So again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. I'll do it, I won't. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. It's pretty, you know, there's a lot of truth behind this. We may have best intentions, you know, but when we say, oh, I swear to God I will be there, I swear to God I'll do this for you, I swear on my mother's grave, you know, I will take care of this, and Jesus knows, well, we're not always going to keep our promises. We're not always going to be able to go through with that. I think it's just interesting that, like in a court of law, if I'm not mistaken, we no longer require you to swear on the Bible. You know, when you say, raise your right hand. If you don't want to, you don't have to put your hand on the Bible. And I think Jesus would say, well, that's probably a good thing, because I don't want people putting their hand on the Bible to swear an oath by the Bible that they're going to tell the truth when who knows what happens in court, right? So, with this being said, God is the only one who is going to keep His oaths. And so this is the oath to Noah, where he says, I'm going to establish my covenant. Okay, and covenants were a big deal back then. There would be it would be a major ceremony saying, I'm going to commit to you, you need to commit to me. And we'll get more on that when we get to Abraham in a couple of minutes. But God says, I'm going to establish my covenant with you. Think about it. Does God have to establish a covenant with Noah or with humanity?
No.
Right? I mean, God is God. He is the one who created. Whether it makes us feel good or not, He is the one who can destroy His creation. You know, when little kids are playing in the sandbox and they make whatever they make, and then they come alongside and they destroy it, right? Okay? God has that power. God is omniscient, He is all-knowing, and He knows the ramifications of certain actions. But yet, He still chooses to pretty much reach over to Noah, shake hands with Noah, and say, hey Noah, just so you know, I am not going to destroy the earth by flood again. And I just underline, never again, never again, never again. And then, the rainbow is that symbol for him, that reminder. And I think I don't know, I would love to get your feedback on this. Verse 15, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. So when God sees the rainbow, he says it reminds him. Does God need to be reminded of his covenant with us? What do you think? Or is he just trying to speak in terms that we can understand? How many of you need reminders to remember to do things? It's a Wonderful Life, right? Uncle Billy, you've all seen that, right? Where he ties the ribbons around his fingers and then he can't remember why he tied the ribbon around his finger. That's us. And so I think God is just simply trying to, speak to us in terms we can understand. God certainly doesn't need to be reminded. Yeah, Margot.
I think he's also saying, giving this to us as a reminder to us that he remembers.
Yeah.
It's like, of course he remembers, but we need to be reminded that he remembers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Annette's mom, whenever we were driving around and we saw a rainbow, it's like, there it is, and you remember, this is why it's here, No, it's here because of the rain and the sun, right? No, it's a reminder for us as Christians that God said this. Yeah, Dan?
Quick story. There was one day we were driving home with the kids, they were little, and we saw the most gorgeous rainbow. So we kind of positioned the car and got out where we could take a perfect picture of it, and got it developed. Forgot we had black and white film. Now that's a reminder.
Wow. You took a picture of a storm, Dad.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So you have like a double reminder now.
That's right.
Put color film in. And so as far as I'm establishing my covenant, and then this is going to be the sign that I will not destroy earth by a flood, and this is a sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth. Because remember, with the flood, I personally struggle with, and I mentioned this last week, not only does he get rid of humanity, okay, but he also gets rid of all the creatures. All the living creatures are destroyed because of man's sin and what they have brought on the earth. And so when he says this, he's not just saying humanity, he's saying all life on the earth. So do the horses go, hey, there's a rainbow? I don't know. Do animals, what's that connection? I'm sure God and the animals have some sort of language. After all, he brought them 2 by 2 into Noah's Ark. So I think that's a fascinating statement. Yeah, Tim.
So on the whole memory thing, for example, I know that my father is my father, and I haven't forgotten that he's my father. But whenever I pray and I say, Father in heaven, and then I kind of go through this thing where I say, Abba, and then I say the English daddy and dad, I always think of my dad at that time. I remember him.
Right.
It doesn't mean I forgot him. It just means I'm thinking of him because of something.
Yeah.
And I think what God is saying is when I see that rainbow, I will remember my covenant.
Right.
I will reaffirm it in my memory. It doesn't mean I forgot it.
Yeah.
It just means I'm thinking of it.
Right. So it's just kind of remembering that intimacy.
Calls to mind.
Yeah. So then we go from Noah to Abraham, and that's what I want to spend most of the time with. Actually, just one more summary verse. So remember, he was 600 when the flood started. He lived to be 950. Wow. So he got to see, the birth of a new earth, if you will. I wonder if that was a blessing that God provided Noah. And then chapter 10, just so you know, we're going to skip it. It's the lineage of Noah's sons. And then the Tower of Babel comes in chapter 11. And just for the sake of time, now we go with Abraham. So, Abraham, Father Abraham, Hebrew faith, obviously to them the most important patriarch, the beginning of who the Jews are. And so Hebrews in the Hall of Faith passages just summarizes Abraham, and this is where we're going to go for the next 3 weeks. Is there somebody who could read the Hebrews passage? Thanks, Tim.
By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise or covenant. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God.
So nice to have these summaries for 7 chapters of Genesis. But we, Abraham, we look to him as someone who had tremendous faith. His story, his journey is one of, doesn't even seem to be familiar with God when God introduces himself, and then takes all these steps to leave his comfort zone. And yes, he stumbles along the way. We're going to talk about a few of those, and one of them especially is a major stumble. But he, just for our point of reference, down here in Ur, at least that's where most archaeologists, people who study this, think Ur was. If you remember where the Garden of Eden is supposedly located, that area down there, Mesopotamia, that very fertile region. So his family, so he's not an adult at this time, his family has stayed there in Ur of the Chaldeans, and then they are going to work their way up to the top there, just following the river, which makes a lot of sense in a arid climate like that, and then he's going to head back down into the Promised Land. So just keep that map as a mental image. But it's really interesting as we look at his flight out of Ur, okay? And so as it mentions up in Hebrews, he's going to end up in the Promised Land, but they're not going to stay there for very long, okay? But here we go. So this is the account of Terah's family line. Terah became the father of Abram, okay? So that's going to be an important thing as we go through this story, especially with the early patriarchs. There's going to be name changes, okay? So it's almost as if God is saying, all right, now that you truly know who I am, I'm going to reveal my calling and plans on your life. And so with Abram, he obviously becomes Abraham. And so Terah is his father, and this is where they live, Nahor and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. And so Lot is another important character. We won't talk too much about Sodom and Gomorrah because I believe if you attended any of the teachings from back in the spring, we unearthed Sodom and Gomorrah pretty well. So we'll kind of just wade our way through that a little bit. And then, while his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of Chaldeans, in his land of his birth. Abraham and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. So once again, she's going to have a name change. And the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Ishkah. Now Sarai was childless, more on that to come, because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, okay, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, and the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But they got to Haran, or Haran, if you want to go with the Hebrew. When they got there and settled there, Terah lived 205 years and he died there. So Abram's dad takes the kids on a trip to head down here, but ends up dying there, okay? And so what's that, Scott?
After 205 years?
205 years, yeah. That was quite that trip got sidetracked pretty big. So they're hanging out there. That becomes the place where Abram is going to grow up, obviously. His dad was 205 years old. And so we go from there to God saying, all right, Abram, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. So in the end of chapter 11, there does not seem to be any familiarization between God and Abram. And from what we understand from other verses, Abram is polytheistic at this time. He and his family worship multiple gods. So within that context, God presents himself and just starts talking to him, having this conversation, much like he did with Noah. Noah, I want you to do this for me. Okay. We know that Noah was righteous, and we know that Abram is also righteous. And so God says, you're my man, Abram. I have big plans for you. And right away, we're going to test your faith. I want you to leave your comfort zone, your family, and go where I want you to go. Not, okay, here's the map. Let's input the coordinates. Get your MapQuest app out, Abram. This is exactly where we're going to go, okay? Simply go where I tell you to go. That is a huge, huge step of faith, okay? And we know that as Abram makes this trip, he starts to grow in wealth, both in amount of servants, livestock, things like that. And he truly is blessed as he goes through this journey. But when he leaves, it sounds like he doesn't leave with much. Okay, he's not a great man yet, if you will. He becomes a great man once he gets to Canaan. And so God just, as part of his covenant, the beginning of his covenant to Abram, he says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Whoa, that's a good start. And I will bless you. I will make your name great. Think about that. The three major monotheistic faiths of the world all call Abram or Abraham great, right? The Jews do. Christians do. Even the Muslims would say Abraham is a prophet and an important person, okay? So that particular statement has really come to fruition. And you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. How many of you want that one? Right? I mean, it's like, God, I want my enemies to be smote, but all my friends, you know. And so these are powerful things to be given by the one true God. Does Abram, how much does he even know of the one true God at this point? I mean, we don't know. It seems like he's just introduced to him. But I think he gets a sense, I'm sure a sense of awe and fear, and is like, I think this is the real deal, Sarai, what do you think? And he's going to follow him, okay? Now, the most important one, and I think this is, I have a blank on the worksheet, or the handout, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. What does he mean by that? All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Margo. Jesus. Right. So if you remember, back in Genesis 3, at the curse, or the cursings, if you will, and the punishments, God already starts to reveal his plan that Eve, one of your offspring, will save the world. Jesus. Okay? Here we are. Now we're up to Abraham. Okay? Just 12 chapters in. Hey, here's another pointing to, through Abraham, through the Jewish people, Jesus is Jewish, okay, you are going to be a blessing or an opportunity for blessings for the entire world through Jesus. This is pretty powerful. You know, God is revealing himself and his plan continually through Scripture, and we see it fulfilled, thankfully for us as believers in Jesus Christ, through Jesus. So all people will be blessed through you. How's that for an opening, right? I mean, and God is the only one who can provide this stuff. You know, a king could promise these things. All right, you're going to be my number 2 guy and all that, but he can't keep that promise. Who knows what's going to happen? Somebody's going to overthrow him, right? But God makes that promise, and he carries it out. Even when Abraham, he's going to make some mistakes. God is still, nope, my plan is going to happen. People are going to be cursed and blessed. And it's really interesting, as you look at Abraham's life, he truly becomes the greatest person in the land that God leads him to. That really comes true. And anybody who comes up against him, whether knowingly or not, ends up having a curse upon them. There's this weird story. Abraham does this twice. He doesn't seem to learn from his mistakes, where he lies about who Sarah is, because it says Sarah is just so beautiful. And he knows that the kings of the land and Pharaoh are going to want to take her into their households. And so he just said, oh, that's my sister. And so they're like, oh, cool. And so they end up having a plague and losing all kinds of things because of that. So in spite of Abram's sin, God still blesses him and curses those who would curse him. Okay, obviously taking Sarah as a wife would not be a good thing for those people. And so God, it's interesting, God doesn't have to make this, right? He could simply say, hey, Abram, here's the deal, I'm God, let's go. Okay? But no, this is what's going to happen, Abraham. And so remember, who is the initial audience hearing this? You know, who gets the original, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books?
The Jews.
The Jewish people, right? Who have just come out of Egypt. They've just been birthed into being a great nation. And so Moses, God and Moses, are reminding them, here's how we got here. And here's who you are. You as a group of people, a great nation, are special. I've taken you out of all the other nations in your mind. It would be a great reminder. Lynn?
Well, I have a question. Okay, so the great nation and the great
Mhm.
name, I don't understand that, because through him and his sins, the great nation, he had sex with that other lady.
Yep.
And then her son is the start of the Muslim race.
Mhm.
And then that is still going on to this day because of that sin.
Yep.
So I don't see that as a great nation. I feel that that's a very,
Yeah.
that's a very devastating thing. And then his great name, I think he messed that up when he had sex with that other lady, because he should have just told his wife, no, he's the head of the household. He should have said, what the heck are you talking about? I'm not going to
Yeah.
do that. So
Yeah.
that great name to me was messed up.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, when he lied and said that it was his sister, and he didn't tell everybody that she wasn't his sister, that she was his wife, and he let people be with her.
Yep.
So, what great name is that?
Well, I
If you
think,
did that, you wouldn't have a great name left in this church.
yeah. Well, I think the important thing is, and we see this throughout Scripture, God uses flawed people. Thankfully, I'm up here. I'm the flawed of anybody. You know, like
Good
Paul
point.
says, I'm the greatest of sinners, but he's the greatest Christian I know besides Jesus, you know. And so, yeah, Scott.
And also great doesn't mean like superlative, awesome person. It just means known and,
Oh, okay.
it
Like
doesn't
the
mean
Hall of
like
Fame.
he's a great guy. It just
Yeah.
means that, his name is great. We all know it.
I see.
We're all descendants of that, so.
Yeah, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, David was called the man after God's own heart, but he had some of the most brutal sins that, were ever recorded. And so I think you're looking at flawed people that ultimately do the right thing and in the end. And I think that Abraham's right up there, very similar to David.
Yeah, and I would argue, Lynn, that Islam is a great nation. The Arabs are a great people. I mean, whether we like it or not, because he didn't follow God's plan, God, and we'll talk about this more next week, God actually says to Hagar, he's going to become there's going to be a great group of people large group of people that are going to come from this error, this problem.
I think Scott raises a good point too. What does the word great mean here?
Yeah, yeah,
I have a question, different question. When I look at his promises, I find it's quite of interesting. God is really appeal to your own self-interest and pride.
yeah,
He said, hey, you'll be a great nation. What
Yeah.
a self kind of,
Yeah.
you will be great.
yeah,
Oh, you'll be wealthy. I was just kind of wondering, why God is doing that instead of saying, hey, you follow me, you're going to die, you're going to sacrifice, and then you'll make me look good.
Yeah, well, I mean, this doesn't completely answer that because I'm sure there's a lot more to your question that we can really understand, but we are given a glimpse of Abraham's heart when he and Lot, their groups of people are fighting with each other, and Abraham is the great one, he's the older one, he's the one with all the land, etc., etc., and he allows Lot to choose where his people can go. And so I think, just like with David, even though horribly flawed human being, he's a man, there's something, I mean, because immediately he is humble when he messes up. And I think there is humility within Abraham that doesn't go to his head. I mean, I can't think of instances in his life where, I mean, yes, okay, you could argue pride and arrogance and that he took matters into his own hands, but I don't think he's saying I'm better than God. I think he thinks he's fulfilling the prophecy.
I see. One of the things what I think he is, that's actually I'm very, very grateful for these, because God is meeting where we are. If I'm a very prideful person,
Right.
he wants reaching out to me, he'll appeal to my pride.
Yes.
I think so. Let's see how you do with it, right?
Yeah,
And he knows we're going to mess up, but yet,
yeah, but I,
yeah, Annette.
Well, and he made these promises to him, and Abraham and Sarah could have said, okay, we'll just wait and see, you're the boss. But, you know, they had a test of faith, and they, you know, they couldn't wait. They were doubting, and they complicated everything. So even though they got these the best promises almost you could ever ask for,
they didn't ask, they just
Yeah.
given.
Yeah.
well, but I mean,
Imagine.
imagine, conceive, you know, whatever. It still wasn't enough because it wasn't in it wasn't in their timing and in the way that they, you know, had imagined it. So I think, you know, they responded like humans and made things more complicated than it should have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like God makes the promises and then instantaneously they're like, oh, I know exactly everything about God. You know, it's a growth process. You know, our faith is, right? I'm sure their faith is. Okay?
And he lived
Yeah.
a long time.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, and if we had everything we ever did recorded for
Yeah.
history to see, it might not be so glamorous.
Thankfully, God said, I'm blind to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan.
We need to distinguish between Ishmaelites or Arabians and Islam. They are different.
Yeah, so that's why I backtracked and said Arabs.
Yep.
Yeah, so my mistake. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
What did he say?
Oh, that Ishmaelites became the Arabs. They didn't become Islam, but Islam is an Arabic religion. But they became the Arabs. So there's Christian Arabs, is
Yes.
what Dan is trying to
Yes.
say.
Islam was founded by
Yeah.
an Arab.
Yeah. So that's why I kind of went,
Same
whoops,
thing.
and backtracked a little bit.
Another thing about what you were saying about, you know, the selfishness of this promise, feeding his selfishness. It's like what Scott was saying earlier, when God made this promise, God was just introducing himself to Abraham. Abraham was used to these polytheistic gods
Yeah.
who
Promise everything, but
promise everything but give nothing.
yeah. Right?
And so he's like, if Abraham might have been kind of like, you want me to do what? What are you going to do for me if I do this? You know? And it's
Yeah.
like, it wasn't like he had already had a relationship with God.
Yeah.
It's like God was introducing himself, and so God says, I'm going to do all this for you. You do this, and I'm going to do all of this for you.
That's how I become a Christian, because I heard a lot of sermon, if you follow me, you'll be prosperous. You know, if you follow me, and then you're going to have a great marriage. If you follow me, you'll not be, you know, the cited scriptures. I mean, all these good scriptures which helped me to follow God, and then to study, and then eventually I learned all those promises, some are true and some are actually not true. But I think that's probably one of those things, you know, I still hear on the radio preaching that if you give money to the church,
Yeah.
and then you'll be trouble-free.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we have to see this. He's not promising this to any of us. too. I mean, we have to take ourselves out of this, and this is just for one man. Now, he does say, I'm going to make a great nation, and we, you know, whatever great means, but Ming, I completely agree. I mean, I personally think if we ever do, you know, the Jeremiah plans for you, you know, we need to go back to the Olivet Discourse where Jesus is praying about the amount of persecution that's coming to the side. You know, your life is going to be rough. You know, that's his last words to them. This is not going to be an easy thing. And you're right. I mean, we need to make sure, yes, God promises, he promises us blessings and curses. He's going to help us. But, you know, there are things that come along with our sinful actions that we're going to have to live with too, okay? And so, yeah, I agree. And I'm not, I mean, this is for Abraham only. This is not me. I mean, the whole point is to show Israel, who has just come out of 430 years of bondage, that I made this promise, now here we go. Now the fun begins, okay? But yet they screw up, right? How many different times do they mess up through that whole going into the promised land thing? Okay, we'll get to that in November. But he blesses them when things are good, curses them when they're like, okay. When the judges come and they turn their back, they go through this whole sin cycle and turn their back on God. He's like, all right, have fun with that. Oh, now you're back, okay? So, yeah, so I agree, me, completely. All right, okay, so for 7 minutes. All right, so this is back in the time of Moses, making a covenant was more than just, let's shake on it, okay, get the papyrus out, let's sign on it or something like that. A real covenant, usually between like two kings or, you know, two generals in the military or something, was a pretty advanced process. And so God, in order to, you know, speak in a language that this group of people is going to understand in Moses' time, uses and explains it to that depth, where they go through this process, where God is going to make this covenant with Abraham, go through the formal covenant process, but what's different in this is, instead of both people agreeing and walking through, and we'll talk about this, through the middle of the animals, only God does. Because God knows that Abraham is not going to keep his side of the bargain. He knows he's not. And that is such, I mean, that should make us all feel, you know, God's grace for us. I am not going to keep up my end of the bargain. Okay? I know I'm not. And thankfully God's like, I know you're not, but let's keep trying. Let's keep working at it. You know, we can grow in faith. The Holy Spirit's there to help you. So this is the process, and it's kind of fascinating. We're like, what? Why are they doing that? And it's kind of strange for us, obviously, because not many of us have heifers to cut in half. But but Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So what God has done is, there's this fascinating thing on the track. So they go up to Haran, and then God says, all right, I'm going to take you to Canaan. Okay, Canaan's full of bad people at the time. And so Abraham gets to live in the promised land for a little while, and so God says, this is going to be all yours. But unfortunately, there's going to be a 400-year kind of blip where you're not going to be in the promised land, you're actually going to be in Egypt, and then you guys are going to come back and take over the land to a degree. Okay, so this is going to be a long process, but Abraham at least gets to, oh wow, this is pretty nice, God. This is a great place for you to establish your kingdom. And so he says, so how am I going to take possession of it? So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, it is weird, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Okay? The birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. This is a weird scene for us in Western culture. Like, what is going on here?
And it's weird the details that are.
I know, right?
We know God doesn't just throw weird things in for no reason.
Yeah.
But once
Why
again,
did he
that's
tell us the birds weren't cut in half?
well, and obviously that is a tie-in to how they do covenants now. And yeah, the birds are usually used for sacrifice. So I don't know. But you're right. It is incredible detail.
There's got to be some reason
Yeah.
there.
As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and this is, to me, this is a strange phrase, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. I don't know if that's like awe, fear, power,
Depression.
what's that?
It would be depression to me.
Because he just killed those animals?
Well, I'm glad I'm here today
Don't know
because
why.
I couldn't do that.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. For them, that's going to be their way of life for 1,000 years.
To cut animals
It's
in
what they know.
Yeah.
It's what they know.
That was the sacrifices. For us in Western, but, okay, Lynn, do you eat meat?
I do, but if I had to see the animal,
Well, I'm just-
I would never, I know,
So,
I
yeah,
know, but,
yeah. No, I couldn't do this either. I can't even hunt.
yeah,
Jarrett
right.
went out on an antelope hunt with his friends. I was glad they didn't catch anything Friday. Or
Yeah.
Saturday. That's not me. Scott.
I have a thought. Okay, it's not an original thought, but it's a thought anyway. When I, heard
Yep.
the guy up at Hume talking about all this, the sleep, thick and dreadful darkness was because, according to this guy Tim, who I heard speak, it's because Abram knew that he wasn't going to be able to keep the covenant.
So he's worried.
So, because the covenant is to death. If either party does not keep the covenant, they promise their life and the life of their descendants that they'll keep the covenant. So Abram, he's being promised the promised land, and God's making this covenant, and Abram is like, great, okay, and so they cut the animals in half, and
Like, it's go time.
all the blood flows into like a ditch.
Yeah.
And then when they make the covenant, the two people of the covenant walk through it, back and forth, saying that like, I will keep this covenant for as long as I live, and if I don't, you can kill me and my descendants. And so that, the blood's on them, it's gross, it makes it has an impact.
Yeah.
So Abram knows what's coming, and the promise is that I will do all of this as long as you stay faithful, and all of you stay faithful. And it's like in 17, I think, where he talks about this will happen if you stay faithful. Abram knows he's human, and it's not going to work. So he's like, okay, I'm willing to do this, but I know I'm going to blow it, and this is a life or death covenant.
Yeah. And once again, as grim as this is another comforting thing to me. 3 chapters before, God has promised him everything, including having a great nation and a great name and all that, but yet he still is doubting his end of the bargain, which, goes into the deep sleep because he's worried about that. Yeah, Annette?
Well, I just see it as he's asking the Lord, well, how do I know I'm going to get all these things? He doesn't say, well, how do I know I can keep up my end of the bargain and be faithful?
Yeah, I'm wondering where they got that.
Didn't you say before this was really a one-sided covenant?
This one is, but he didn't know that.
Abraham did not.
He didn't know that going into it, though. He didn't know that God was going to be like, all right, you're asleep. Here goes the covenant. I'm doing all the action, and I'm doing all the commitment. He didn't know that, though, when he fell asleep. Like, yeah, I mean,
I have a question, actually, I'll ask myself.
if the question will last 1 minute and 30
Okay.
seconds.
The question is really, if we can live this all over again, would you be Abraham?
Would well, yeah, I would. Having the God of, and knowing his mistakes,
No,
me,
it's not.
I'd be able
Because
to,
what I'm saying is this.
I'd have to hide my wife, she's beautiful, so I agree.
The reason I'm asking that is this, because whenever we want to follow God, we're only thinking about one part of promises, not the whole story, not a really ultimate goal. If you want to thinking about ultimate goal, you probably say, yes, I will do that. But oftentimes we just focus on a very small part of it. We not forget about the whole package.
Yeah.
If you're really thinking about it from the worldly perspective, I would not be Abraham
Yeah.
to go through all these. Seriously.
Oh, I mean, especially those promises, those are vast. How about can I just have a nice house with a family
Yeah.
and a couple of
I
sheep
get
or
the part where we're
something?
gonna sacrifice God.
Yeah, well, we didn't even get there yet, right?
But what I don't
Goodness.
understand is, you said last week, it really saddened Jesus' God's heart to kill his
Yeah.
creation.
Yep.
And that meant his animals, because he loved those animals that he made. Why would he want, after that hurt and pain,
Yep.
create some more beautiful animals and then go tell people to cut them in half? That, and did
Because,
they do it vertically, horizontally? What did they use? What did they do with the animal after they did that? How sick is that? Why would
because
he tell somebody to do
humans
sick
are more
stuff?
important than the animals. We are the cherished part of his creation. And he is willing to sacrifice animals so that we can have salvation. I think that's,
I mean, and I think, you know, when they sacrificed back then, all the streets and the canals were filled with blood. I mean,
it was
and it was a nasty stench and everything. And I think it was to also show that because of our sin, this stuff has to
Nasty and
occur,
gross.
and ultimately culminating to the most important thing, Jesus dying on the cross. And yeah.
It's also important to remember too that animals, and by and large, were their currency. So they were also giving of their means by doing so.
Yeah. So I agree, Lynn. The temple, this most beautiful of things that man built, was one of the most disgusting places on earth during sacrifice time. I agree. Well, hey, we almost did the whole thing. So it says, for 400 years you guys are going to be captives. Oh, thank you. I'm sure Abraham's thinking. And then you're going to go back in the land of the Kenites, the Barbites. Yeah, I just love saying that. But they're going to have to go back in and conquer the land when we'll see that happen in Exodus. So there we go. Just a minute over. Woo! We did it. All right, so next week there's no new homework. It's just reread because we are going to do Ishmael and Isaac next week. So both of them are great nations things. So that's going to be fun. Thanks.
Thank you.